The girl who walked into darkness. The night Luna Blackwood decided to walk into the abandoned castle on the edge of Thornwood Village was the same night everything changed forever. And though she did not know it yet, her entire life had been leading to this single moment where darkness would finally meet someone who was not afraid to stare back at it without flinching even once. Luna was 23 years old with hair dyed the color of midnight dark eyeliner that made her pale eyes look like two moons floating in shadow black lipstick that never smeared no matter how many times people told her she looked strange, and a heart that had been broken so many times she had stopped counting the pieces scattered across the years of her difficult life. She wore heavy boots that announced her arrival with every step, silver rings on every finger that caught what little light dared to exist around her, and a leather jacket covered in patches and pins that told the story of a girl who had learned very early that fitting in was never going to be her destiny because she was made for something else entirely, something she had not yet discovered. Everyone in Thornwood Village knew the castle was forbidden, and they told stories about it in hushed whispers when the sun went down and shadows grew long against the cobblestone streets that wound through the small community like dark rivers leading nowhere good. The elders spoke of a monster who lived within those crumbling walls, a creature who had existed for centuries and fed on the blood of anyone foolish enough to cross the iron gates that stood like warnings against the clouded sky. Children were taught to never look at the castle for too long because some said the monster could feel when eyes landed on his home, and he would remember your face for when he grew hungry enough to leave his prison of stone and come looking for fresh victims to drain. Luna had heard all these stories since she was a small child sitting on her grandmother's knee, listening with wide eyes as the old woman described the vampire king who ruled over nothing but dust and cobwebs and memories of a time when humans bowed before creatures of the night without question. But Luna had never been good at following rules or believing stories that were designed to make her afraid of things she could not see. And tonight she was desperate in a way that pushed fear to the back of her mind, where it could not reach her or slow her determined steps toward what everyone called certain doom. 3 days ago, her little brother Marcus had wandered too close to the castle grounds while chasing a stray cat he wanted to save. And he had not come home since that terrible afternoon when the clouds covered the sun and a cold wind blew through the village like a warning nobody understood until it was too late. The village elders had held a meeting and decided nothing could be done because anyone who entered the castle never returned, and her parents had wept and prayed and accepted that Marcus was gone forever like so many others before him. But Luna refused to accept what everyone told her was unavoidable truth, and she refused to let her 12-year-old brother become just another name whispered in the long list of the Vampire King's victims. The iron gates groaned like wounded animals when Luna pushed them open with both hands, her rings scraping against the rusted metal as she stepped onto the overgrown path that led through what had once been beautiful gardens, but now looked like a graveyard for flowers and hedges and forgotten beauty. The castle rose before her like a mountain of shadow, with towers that pierced the clouds and windows that watched her approach like hundreds of dark eyes following her every movement with cold curiosity. Luna did not hesitate or slow her pace because hesitation was a luxury for people who had something to lose. And she had already lost her brother, so there was nothing left to take from her except her own life, which she was willing to trade if it meant saving someone she loved more than herself. The massive front doors were made of wood so dark it looked black, carved with symbols and images that Luna did not recognize but felt something stir inside her chest when she traced them with her fingertips, almost like the doors were alive and reading her intentions through her touch. When she pushed the doors open and stepped inside the castle, the cold hit her immediately like walking into a freezer that had been running for 1,000 years. And she wrapped her arms around herself while her eyes adjusted to the darkness that seemed thicker here than anywhere she had ever been. Candles lined the walls in ornate holders made of silver and gold, their flames flickering with an unnatural steadiness as if wind did not exist within these ancient halls. And the floor beneath her boots was made of marble that echoed with every step she took toward the grand staircase that dominated the center of the entrance hall. Portraits hung on every wall showing men and women from different centuries, wearing clothes that Luna had only seen in history books, their painted eyes seeming to follow her as she moved deeper into the castle that hummed with a strange energy she could not explain, but felt in her bones like music too low for human ears to properly hear. She was halfway up the staircase when she heard it, a voice that came from everywhere and nowhere at the same time, deep and smooth like velvet wrapped around thunder, speaking words that made her freeze mid-step with her hand gripping the stone railing. The voice said that she was either very brave or very foolish to enter his home uninvited, and it asked what a creature dressed in shadows and silver wanted from someone who had lived in real shadows for longer than her entire bloodline had existed on this earth. Luna forced herself to keep climbing the stairs because she refused to let fear control her when her brother's life depended on her courage. And she called out into the darkness that she was looking for a child who had wandered into this place 3 days ago. A boy with brown curly hair and a smile that could light up the darkest room. And she demanded to know if he was still alive or if she was risking everything for nothing but revenge. The laughter that followed her words was not cruel or mocking like she had expected from a monster, but instead sounded almost surprised and genuinely amused, as if no one had spoken to the owner of that voice with such boldness in a very long time. The candles around her suddenly burned brighter, and Luna spun around when she felt a presence behind her, coming face to face with the vampire king himself standing on the step just below where she stood, which meant she was actually looking down at him for this first meeting. He was tall with silver white hair that fell past his shoulders, eyes the color of blood mixed with gold that seemed to glow faintly in the candlelight, skin so pale it looked like moonlight had decided to become a person, and features so perfectly beautiful they looked carved by artists who had spent centuries practicing just for this single face. He wore clothing that belonged to another era entirely, a dark coat with silver embroidery, a high collar, and rings on his fingers that matched the ones Luna wore in a way that felt like coincidence, but also felt like something more. The Vampire King introduced himself as Kale, and he told Luna that he had indeed found a small human boy wandering his grounds 3 nights ago, crying for his sister and covered in scratches from pushing through the thorny barrier that surrounded the castle like a protective wall. Luna felt her heart leap with hope and fear combined because knowing Marcus was found did not mean he was safe, and she demanded to know where her brother was and what the vampire had done to him since children were not supposed to be harmed even by monsters. Kale tilted his head and studied her with those glowing eyes for a long moment before a small smile curved his pale lips, and he asked Luna why she assumed he would hurt a child when he had spent the last 300 years protecting this region from far worse things than himself. The question confused her because everything she had ever been told about the Vampire King said he was a killer and a monster who cared for nothing except his own hunger and his own isolation from a world that had moved on without him. Kale began walking up the stairs past her, and Luna had no choice but to follow as he told her that stories were powerful things that often contained more fear than truth, more hatred than understanding, and more ignorance than anyone liked to admit when confronting their own beliefs about creatures they had never actually met. He explained that he had been placed in this castle centuries ago by those who feared what he was rather than understanding who he was, and over time the stories had grown and twisted until the prisoner became a monster in the minds of people who needed something to blame for their own misfortunes. Luna listened with growing confusion because this was not what she had expected to find inside the Forbidden Castle, and she did not know what to believe when the monster spoke with such sadness, and the darkness felt less threatening with every step she took beside him. They reached a door at the end of a long hallway, and Kale opened it to reveal a room lit with warm firelight where Marcus sat on a comfortable chair eating what looked like soup while wrapped in blankets that looked more expensive than everything Luna owned combined. Marcus saw his sister and immediately jumped up to run into her arms, crying and laughing at the same time as he told her about the nice man who had found him lost and scared, who had given him food and warm clothes and a safe place to sleep, and who had promised that his family would come for him soon because people who loved each other always found their way back together. Luna held her brother tight and felt tears burning her eyes as relief flooded through her body. But when she looked up at Kale, standing in the doorway watching them with an expression she could not read, she realized that everything she thought she knew about this castle and its master was completely wrong. But before she could speak or thank him or ask the thousand questions now burning in her mind, a sound shattered the moment like glass breaking against stone, a sound of something massive hitting the castle walls from outside, followed by screams that did not belong to anything human or vampire or any creature Luna had ever heard in her life. Kale's face transformed instantly from gentle curiosity to deadly serious concern, and he told Luna and Marcus to stay in this room no matter what they heard or saw through the windows, because the real monsters had finally found his castle, and they would kill everyone inside if Kale could not stop them alone. The castle shook again as something roared outside, and Luna realized with growing horror that the Vampire King was not the danger at all. He was the only thing standing between them and something far worse, and as Kale vanished into the shadows to face whatever was attacking, Luna held her brother close and wondered if she had just traded one nightmare for another. Oh, the truth behind the darkness. The sounds that filled the castle for the next hour would haunt Luna's dreams for years to come, and she spent every minute of that terrible time holding Marcus against her chest, while covering his ears so he would not hear the roars and crashes, and what sounded like the world itself being torn apart just outside the walls that protected them. She tried to look through the window to see what was happening in the darkness beyond, but the glass was thick and old and showed her nothing except flashes of something massive moving through the overgrown gardens, destroying everything it touched while a figure in dark clothes moved faster than her eyes could follow. Marcus trembled in her arms and asked if the nice man would be okay, and Luna realized that her little brother had seen something in Kale that she had almost missed, because she was too focused on the stories she had been told rather than the evidence right in front of her face. When silence finally fell over the castle like a heavy blanket dropped from the sky, Luna waited with her heart pounding so hard she could hear it echoing in her ears, counting the seconds until someone or something came through the door to tell her whether she and Marcus would survive this night. The door opened slowly, and Kale stepped inside looking like he had been through a war, his beautiful clothing torn and covered in something dark and thick that was not blood in any color Luna recognized, his silver hair wild and tangled, his pale face marked with scratches that healed as she watched with wide eyes that refused to blink. He told them it was over and they were safe for now, but his voice was tired in a way that suggested this battle had cost him something more than physical energy, something she could not see or understand with her limited human knowledge of this hidden world. Luna demanded to know what had attacked the castle and why it had come here tonight of all nights when she and her brother were inside, and Kale leaned against the doorframe as if standing required more strength than he currently possessed, while he considered how to answer her questions. He explained that there were creatures in this world far older and far more dangerous than vampires, beings that had existed before humans learned to write or build or dream of anything beyond survival. And these ancient things had been hunting him for centuries because he possessed something they wanted desperately enough to destroy anything that stood in their way. Luna asked what he could possibly have that would make monsters chase him for 300 years, and Kale smiled sadly before telling her that he carried inside himself the last fragment of an ancient power that could either save the world or destroy it completely depending on who controlled it. Marcus had fallen asleep in Luna's arms from sheer exhaustion, and she carefully laid him on the comfortable bed in the corner of the room before turning to face Kale with determination burning in her pale eyes like twin flames that refused to be extinguished by fear or confusion. She told him that she deserved the full truth since those creatures had nearly killed her and her brother, and she was not leaving this castle until she understood why a monster everyone feared turned out to be a protector nobody knew existed. Kale studied her for a long moment with those strange red gold eyes, and something in his expression shifted as if he was seeing her clearly for the first time and finding something unexpected in what he saw. He invited her to follow him if she truly wanted to understand, but he warned her that truth was a door that could never be closed once opened, and she might prefer the comfortable lies she had believed her entire life over the complicated reality waiting beyond her current understanding. Luna followed Kale through winding hallways that seemed to go on forever, passing doors that whispered and rooms that glowed with colors that should not exist, until they reached a chamber hidden deep in the heart of the castle, where the walls were covered in paintings that told a story older than anything Luna had ever imagined. Kale began speaking as Luna examined the images, his voice taking on a quality that suggested he was sharing secrets he had kept locked away for longer than she could comprehend. Secrets that had weighed on him for centuries while he waited for someone who would listen without running away. He told her that long ago, before humans had spread across the world, there existed a war between light and darkness that threatened to tear reality itself into pieces too small to ever repair. And in the final battle, a creature of pure light sacrificed themselves to seal away the darkness forever, placing the last of their power into a vessel that would protect it until the world was ready to use it again. That vessel had been a human man who later became a vampire after being attacked by something hungry in the darkness of an ancient forest. And that man was Kale himself, changed by blood and shadow, but still carrying the light he had been chosen to protect when he was young and mortal, and believed the world made sense. The creatures attacking the castle were servants of the sealed darkness, drawn to the light Kale carried like moths to a flame that could destroy them if only he knew how to release it properly. But centuries of fighting had taught him nothing except how to run and hide and survive another night while the world forgot he existed at all. Luna asked why he did not simply give the power to someone else if carrying it brought nothing but pain and isolation. And Kale laughed bitterly before explaining that the power had become part of him now, woven into his very soul so deeply that removing it would destroy him completely and possibly destroy the power itself in the process. Luna felt something shift inside her chest as she listened, a feeling she could not name but recognized as important in a way that went beyond simple sympathy for someone who had suffered. She told Kale that he had spent 300 years alone protecting something precious while the world told stories about him being a monster. And she thought that was the saddest thing she had ever heard, because no one should have to carry that kind of burden without someone to share the weight. Kale looked at her with an expression of wonder and pain combined, and he admitted that no one had spoken to him with such kindness in so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to be seen as something more than a threat or a tool. Luna reached out and touched his cold hand with her warm one, and she felt something like electricity pass between them, a connection that seemed to resonate with the mysterious power Kale carried inside himself. Kale pulled away suddenly as if burned by her touch, his eyes wide with shock and something that looked almost like fear. And he told Luna that she needed to leave the castle immediately because something impossible had just happened, and he needed time to understand what it meant. Luna demanded to know what he was talking about since she was tired of secrets and half-explanations. But Kale simply shook his head and said that the light inside him had reacted to her presence in a way it had never reacted to anyone in 3 centuries of encounters with humans and creatures alike. Before Luna could respond or argue or demand more answers, a new voice echoed through the chamber, cold and mocking and filled with a darkness that made Luna's skin crawl with instinctive terror. The voice said it was interesting that the Vampire King had finally found his weakness after all this time, and it was going to enjoy using that weakness to finally take what belonged to the darkness. Luna spun around to see a figure standing in the doorway of the chamber, a woman who looked human but moved like smoke and shadows combined, with eyes that were completely black from corner to corner and a smile that contained too many teeth for any normal mouth. Kale moved immediately to put himself between Luna and this new threat, his entire body tense and ready for violence, and he addressed the woman as Morgana while demanding to know how she had entered his castle without triggering his protective barriers. Morgana laughed and explained that while he was busy fighting her pets outside, she had slipped through his defenses like shadow through cracks in a wall, waiting and watching, until he revealed the thing she had been searching for since the war that created him. She pointed at Luna and declared that the girl was the key to finally unlocking the power Kale had protected for so long. And now that she knew what Luna was, nothing in this world or any other would stop the darkness from reclaiming what the light had stolen. Kale attacked without warning, moving faster than Luna could track with her human eyes, and Morgana met him with equal speed as the two ancient beings clashed in a battle that shattered the paintings on the walls and cracked the stone floor beneath their feet. Luna grabbed a broken piece of metal from somewhere, ready to fight even though she knew she stood no chance against creatures who had existed since before her ancestors were born, and she watched desperately for any opportunity to help the vampire who had turned out to be so different from everything she had believed. But Morgana was too powerful and too fast, and within moments she had Kale pinned against the wall with shadows wrapping around his body like chains that burned wherever they touched his pale skin. Morgana turned to Luna with that terrible smile still stretching her face and promised that the girl would learn to embrace the darkness willingly, or she would watch everyone she loved die slowly before Morgana took what she needed by force. Something inside Luna snapped at those words, a barrier she never knew existed breaking open to release a feeling that started in her chest and spread through her entire body like wildfire consuming dry wood. Light exploded from her hands and her eyes and every inch of her skin, pure and blinding and powerful in a way that made Morgana scream and release Kale as she stumbled backward with shadows peeling away from her body like skin being burned. Luna did not understand what was happening or how she was doing it, but she knew with absolute certainty that she had just discovered why Kale's power had reacted to her, why the darkness wanted her so badly, and why nothing in her life had ever felt right until this exact moment when everything finally made terrifying sense. As the light faded and Luna collapsed to her knees from exhaustion, she heard Kale whisper something that made her blood run cold and her heart race with a combination of fear and destiny colliding. He said that she was not just anyone who wandered into his castle seeking her brother. She was the descendant of the light being who had given Kale his power 3 centuries ago, and her bloodline had been hidden and protected all this time, waiting for the moment when the darkness grew strong enough to require a new warrior. Morgana had retreated, but she would return, and this time she would bring an army. The light within the Shadowluna spent the next week learning things about herself and the world that would have seemed like pure fantasy just days ago. And Kale proved to be a patient teacher, despite the danger growing closer with every sunset that painted the sky in shades of blood and fire outside the castle windows. He explained that the light power she carried had been passed down through her family for generations, dormant and waiting for a trigger that would awaken it when the time was right. And apparently that trigger was contact with the fragment of original power that Kale carried inside himself like a torch in endless night. Marcus stayed close to Luna throughout her training, watching with wonder as his sister learned to summon light from her hands and create barriers of pure energy that could stop even the shadows Morgana controlled. And he told her every day that he always knew she was special even when nobody else seemed to notice. Kale taught Luna that power without understanding was dangerous, and understanding without compassion was empty, and that the truly strong were those who could choose mercy even when violence would be easier and more satisfying. He shared stories of his long existence, the loves he had lost, the friends who had aged and died while he remained unchanged, the loneliness that had nearly driven him to surrender just to end the endless cycle of fighting and hiding and surviving without truly living. Luna found herself drawn to him in ways that surprised her, not because of his beauty or his power, but because of the gentle heart he had protected beneath centuries of necessary coldness, the kindness he still showed to a lost child even when the world had given him no reason to be kind at all. She told him that she understood isolation because she had felt like an outsider her entire life, never fitting into the world that seemed designed for people who were simpler and easier and less strange than she could ever pretend to be. On the seventh night, Kale told Luna that Morgana would attack at midnight when the darkness was strongest and the light was weakest, bringing every creature of shadow she had gathered over centuries of patient waiting. He gave Luna a choice that he said was truly hers to make without pressure or expectation. The choice to stay and fight for a world that had never accepted her, or to take her brother and flee to somewhere Morgana might never find them and live whatever life she could build from the ashes of her old beliefs. Luna looked at Marcus, sleeping peacefully in the warm room that had become his temporary home, then looked at Kale, standing in shadow with his ancient eyes full of a loneliness so deep it made her chest ache. And she made her choice without hesitation, because some things were worth fighting for even when the outcome was uncertain. Midnight came with a storm that felt deliberate, clouds blocking every star and lightning that flickered without thunder as if the sky itself was holding its breath. Morgana appeared at the gates with an army of shadow creatures behind her, beings that had no solid form but radiated hunger and hatred strong enough to feel even from the castle walls where Luna and Kale stood together. Morgana called out that this was their last chance to surrender the light willingly, and if they refused, she would tear the castle apart stone by stone until nothing remained except the memories of those foolish enough to stand against the eternal darkness that had always been destined to win. Luna stepped forward before Kale could stop her, standing on the castle wall where Morgana could see her clearly, and she spoke words that carried across the distance with surprising strength for a human voice facing impossible odds. She told Morgana that the darkness might be eternal, but so was the light, and generations of her family had protected that light not because they were forced to, but because they understood something the darkness never could. She said that love and hope and kindness were not weaknesses to be exploited, but strengths that had carried humanity through every dark night since the beginning of time. And she would rather die fighting for those things than live as a servant of something that had forgotten what it meant to feel anything beyond hunger and hatred. Morgana attacked with a wave of shadows that blocked out what little light remained, and Luna met her with everything she had learned in a week of desperate training, combined with everything she had always been without knowing it. Light and darkness clashed above the castle in a display that would have looked like the end of the world to anyone watching from the village below. And Luna fought not with hatred for her enemy, but with love for everything she was protecting, every person who had ever shown her kindness, every moment of beauty she had experienced in her strange and difficult life. Kale fought beside her, using the power he had carried for centuries in ways he had never dared before, trusting Luna to anchor the light while he directed it against enemies who had hunted him for longer than most civilizations had existed. The battle seemed endless, each wave of shadow creatures replaced by more, each attack Luna blocked followed by stronger attacks from Morgana who grew more desperate and more vicious as her certain victory began to slip away. Luna felt her strength failing as the light inside her burned too bright too fast, consuming her from within as she poured everything into the fight, and she knew that she could not last much longer against an enemy who had centuries more experience and armies at her command. But then she felt something unexpected, a warmth joining her power that was not her own, and she realized that Kale had somehow connected his fragment of ancient light to her power, combining what had been separated for 3 centuries into something new and overwhelming. Morgana screamed as the combined light struck her directly, piercing through her shadows and illuminating the empty darkness where her heart should have been, and Luna saw in that moment the truth of what the darkness really was. Morgana had once been a being of balance, containing both light and shadow in harmony, but she had chosen to embrace only the darkness because it promised power without the vulnerability that came with caring about anything besides herself. The light did not destroy Morgana, but instead offered her something she had not felt in millennia, the possibility of redemption if she chose to accept the light she had rejected so long ago and become whole again. For a single eternal moment, Luna saw Morgana hesitate as if some small part of her remembered what it felt like to be complete. But then the moment passed and Morgana chose darkness again as she had always chosen it. She shattered into 1,000 pieces of shadow that scattered across the sky and disappeared into the night, defeated but not destroyed, driven away but certain to return someday when she found the strength to challenge the light once more. The shadow creatures dissolved without their master to control them, and silence fell over the battlefield as Luna collapsed into Kale's arms with barely enough consciousness remaining to hear him whisper that she had done the impossible and saved everything. Luna woke 3 days later in a bed softer than any she had ever slept in, with sunlight streaming through windows that no longer showed an abandoned castle, but a beautiful home maintained by someone who had finally stopped hiding from the world. Kale sat beside her with a book in his hands and a gentle smile on his face that made him look almost human despite his fangs and his ancient eyes. And he told her that her family had been contacted and would arrive soon to take Marcus home to a village that was already telling new stories about the castle and its master. Luna asked what would happen now that Morgana was defeated and the immediate danger had passed, and Kale told her that the darkness would return eventually because it always did, but they had bought time and more importantly they had found each other. Marcus came running into the room and jumped onto the bed to hug his sister, chattering about everything he had seen and learned and experienced during her long sleep. And Luna held him close while tears of joy ran down her face because she had saved him and that was all that truly mattered. But when she looked at Kale over her brother's shoulder, she knew that she had found something else as well, a purpose and a place and a person who understood her in ways no one ever had before. She told him that she was not leaving once her family arrived because someone needed to help him protect the light, and someone needed to remind him that he was not alone anymore. Kale laughed for the first time in centuries, a genuine sound of pure happiness, and he told her that the castle had been waiting for someone exactly like her since it was first built. 6 months later, Luna stood on the same castle wall where she had faced Morgana, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that seemed brighter and more beautiful than any sunset she had seen before. Kale stood beside her with his hand in hers. Marcus played in the restored gardens below with a dog he had rescued from the village, and the castle hummed with life and light in a way that seemed to celebrate everything they had built together. Luna knew that challenges would come again because darkness never truly disappeared, but she also knew that she was ready for whatever the future held because she had finally found where she belonged. The Goth Baddie who had walked into a vampire's castle expecting to fight a monster had discovered instead that monsters were often just misunderstood guardians, that power came in many forms beyond physical strength, and that love could transform even the darkest places into homes filled with hope. She had entered the castle prepared to die for her brother, and she had emerged as something more than she ever imagined she could be. Nothing would ever be the same, but for the first time in her life, Luna was grateful for the change.